a few weeks ago, I think now, we had the first part of the conversation, got a lot of very valuable feedback from the participants that evening, sharing some stories from their own travel experiences and ways that they thought the proposed rules could be made stronger and more valuable to members of the community. Going to pick up where we left off last time with the second half of those rules, but I will very quickly just run through the 4 rules that we discussed last time, and that should lead us straight into the 5th major proposal, which will kick off the discussion this evening. The first of the proposed rules was to ensure that passengers have a right to safe and dignified assistance through the course of air travel. We had some conversation about whether or not the definitions of these terms, safe and dignified, needed to be more clearly enunciated. And I'll certainly be including that along with some recommendations in my public comments. The second rule was to ensure a right to prompt in planing, deplaning, and connecting assistance. There were some questions that the DOT had asked about, how we should define promptly, and whether passengers who can walk some of the time should have a right to get off whenever they want. The third is I'm starting to think maybe a bigger deal than I initially thought, and that is to make wheelchair damage a per se or automatic violation of the Air Carrier Access Act. So that means if, for whatever reason, your wheelchair is damaged and not returned in the condition in which you handed it over in the course of your air travel journey, the airline is automatically guilty of a violation. As you may know, I attended a meeting in London last week to discuss rules in air travel, both here in the United States and in Europe. And some of the airline attendees, I won't name who they were, but they were very concerned about this and thought that it was unfair. There was also some discussion about potentially delaying the rulemaking while some of their concerns are given a proper hearing. And I'll certainly be following that to see what comes of it. And then the fourth that we discussed was the requirement for airlines to notify passengers that their wheelchair had been loaded or unloaded, where it was in the course of that process. We talked about how some airlines already have some technology built in to track bags and their mobile applications, and how this can also be utilized for wheelchairs and is being done at some airlines already. Of course, it requires that the chair actually be scanned on board to actually relay that information through the automated system. All right, so and if you wanna check back about specifically what we discussed on those 4 points, the video is published. I shared that in the newsletter, and it's on the website as well. So you can replay that video. I encourage you maybe putting it on 2 times speed. I'm a very slow speaker myself, and so just speed it up. That's a feature of YouTube. So that brings us to point number 5, which is where I'd like to start our conversation this evening. As I did in the first part of this conversation, I will talk about the proposal itself, share some of the questions, the most important questions that the DOT is asking for answers to, and that really should direct our public comment. And so with respect to this proposal, the DOT is saying that if your wheelchair isn't loaded on the flight that you're on, the airline will be required to return it to you within 24 hours, and that's to the final destination. So if it was lost, on your first flight of a connecting itinerary, their responsibility is to get it to you within 24 hours at wherever your final destination was, by whatever means possible. Now, that is well, that's left to interpretation. I think airlines aren't going to charter an airplane to make a special trip to deliver your wheelchair. So, I'm not necessarily sure how this will alter airlines' behavior when a wheelchair is delayed. I've always thought they try to, get it on the next flight possible. I have, on a couple of occasions, been disconnected from my wheelchair, and the waits were, I believe, 90 minutes or 2 hours on the first experience and several hours on the second. I was on a nonstop itinerary in those cases, and so my wheelchair was able to be reconnected with me literally on the next or subsequent one of the subsequent flights to my destination. But nonetheless, the questions the DOT is asking here really relate to your experience during the time that you're disconnected from a wheelchair that has been left behind. And the questions are, what types of seating options would best accommodate passengers who are waiting in the airport for their delayed wheelchair to arrive? Obviously, your seat cushion might be left behind on your power wheelchair or your manual wheelchair, probably not your manual wheelchair, but you could be disconnected from it. The DOT wants to know what airlines should be required to provide for you to sit in so that you're safe and comfortable while you wait. And then secondly, and this is, I think, probably what will drive the majority of our conversation on this point, it's if you incur additional costs because your wheelchair is delayed, should the airline be responsible for reimbursing you for the costs that you've incurred? And then what are these potential costs? So the DOT wants us to outline all of the potential costs that we could incur, financial or otherwise, as a result of being disconnected from our wheelchairs. And so I would love to open it up to see if anyone here on the call has some thoughts about these questions in particular. You can just unmute yourself. This is being recorded. So if you do appear on video, you'll appear on the recorded video that is published later. Would love to have your input. And if not, I will just ramble on myself. I do see a comment here. I see Glenn has come off mute, and Marilyn.
Ladies first.
Actually, I'm going to cheat because the voice is not Marilyn's. It's Marilyn's husband who's right next to her.
The question I have is, why isn't there a fixed fee to incentivize the airline to get you the chair as quickly as possible, say like $2,500 a day or something, to put some teeth into the rule if they don't get it to you within 2 hours or so? Because as we know, we're gonna have to rent a chair on our own if they don't provide one. And the way it is now, the airlines are driven solely by economics. and they will do what they have to do if it's in their economic interest. So we need to make it in their economic interest to uh, first not lose the chair, and B, to expeditiously and charter that airplane to get it to you.
Yeah, I certainly appreciate that. And Marilyn's husband, I forgot your name.
I'm Bruce Brand.
Bruce. Thank you for that. I think that one of the challenges is that the DOT has long understood that their authority to collect fines benefits the Treasury rather than the passenger. And so I think that setting a blanket, cost to that, like $2,500 a day, as you suggested, while I would certainly support that, I just don't think that the DOT has the statutory authority under the Air Carrier Access Act to mandate something like that. However, it is reasonable for them to, pose this question: if you have incurred costs that you wouldn't have done if your bag is delayed or your wheelchair is delayed in this case, then the airline perhaps should make you whole. One area
quick
I'll,
follow-up comment.
sure.
Well, they feel free. They have the authority to set the penalty if your flight is late. They have the authority to say how much they owe for that, for overnight accommodations. They have the authority to do it. And the reason they don't do it is because we haven't stood up and demanded that they do it, that the DOT impose a fine on them. They only react to what they are made to do. They're not proactive humanitarian, if you want to call it that, or proactive charitable. They only do the minimum of what they have to do. And if we don't force the DOT to do what is the right thing, to make the airline do the right thing, then we'll be doing this forever. They won't, you'll be without your wheelchair for quite some time.
Yeah, I certainly appreciate that. I think money is at the core, in my view, of what motivates any business, and especially airlines. And I think one of the reasons we haven't seen compliance with the ACAA as it stands is because although the DOT has reserved the authority to issue substantial fines for violations, they rarely exercise the authority. I don't know that. I think maybe only on one occasion during this particular administration have we seen a fine issued to an airline for a disability rights matter. A U.S. airline. There are certainly, as far as history goes, they've been much more willing to fine foreign carriers for isolated incidents, whereas the folks who are writing in all the time about issues with U.S. carriers, they tend to do nothing. And so that really has been a big concern, is making wheelchair damage, for instance, an automatic violation. Well, what does that matter if the DOT actually isn't going to exercise that enforcement authority? And so I think this is certainly an opportunity through submitting public comments to share the expectation that these rules will be enforced seriously. I certainly think that's important. I try to poke the bear as often as I can, including in London. There were some representatives from the U.S. Department of Transportation there, and I made sure to say that folks were in the United States were really losing faith in the DOT as a protector of their civil rights, because every time they submit a complaint, they get a response back saying, we're not taking any action at this time, but yes, your rights were violated. I digress. Glenn?
I mean, to the part B of this, certainly if a passenger incurs costs, they should be absolutely reimbursed, in my view. Seating options, it's a tough one. I mean, most full-time wheelchair users, as you well know, have customized chairs. And to sit on something that doesn't fit you is not a cost issue, it's a health and safety issue. And so I'm actually at a loss, for how you would exercise a reasonable replacement in a short enough time to be worthwhile. I mean, many wheelchair users are full-time. If they're not sitting on their cushion, it's a matter of minutes where they could be doing serious health damage to themselves. And so, buying a new wheelchair or any of these other things are irrelevant if you end up in the hospital because of skin damage. So, obviously, first and foremost, let's not lose the chairs. Let's get us on the chair in the plane so that we can't lose it without losing ourselves. And, that sort of solves the big problem there. But, seating options, I mean, to have some kind of, I mean, you can have the chairs there, but unless they're being used, unless someone's maintaining them, they're going to have flat tires. They're going to have, whatever when they need to be used. So I don't know whether there's a logistical real solution to that part of it, but certainly any costs. I mean, maybe passengers have to go to a hotel and lie down until their chair shows up because that's the only safe way to do it. But you still have to get there. And how are you going to transport? You can't get in a car. It becomes, a very serious logistical nightmare.
Yeah, thank you. Certainly agree with all that. That was one idea that I had. Carriers perhaps at least at major airports to start, and maybe all of them could perhaps have a stock of various wheelchair types, a powered chair that's fully kitted out, and a number of manual wheelchairs, scooters, and the like. I'm sure they would oppose that, the airlines, but I know at least one carrier has considered doing that in the past. They had a very high rate of wheelchair damage incidents, and they thought it might actually be more cost effective to have wheelchairs available at their hubs to hand out when necessary. Gordon, I see your hand raised. Gordon? Okay. If you do want to speak, just unmute your microphone. I think, and maybe this will wrap up this particular point, but I do think it's very important that in the public comments that we sort of lay out in answering this question that I've underlined here. What are the potential costs? When my bag, my luggage is lost, it has my clothes and toiletries and razor in it. And the DOT has long understood that as long as my bag is left behind and I'm disconnected from it, I should have a right to go out and purchase the things that I need in order to sustain me for whatever period of time I'm disconnected from that bag. And so most recently, this happened, I was attending a meeting. Actually, it may very well have been the Aircraft Interiors Expo last year in Hamburg, Germany. And my bag was delayed by about 48 hours. So I went to the mall and did some shopping for clothes, went and got a new razor at the pharmacy, and submitted those receipts to the airline, and I was reimbursed. And so when your wheelchair is left behind, what could those costs be? You're right that in the short term, you're not going to be able to source something that's equivalent to your wheelchair. But I really think that I think the DOT is not necessarily thinking about a replacement of equipment here, but more along the lines of, have you incurred additional transportation costs? Have you missed out on some event that you were meant to attend? I remember the second time that my wheelchair was left behind. I missed a portion of a conference that I was attending. And so, can't really quantify that in dollar terms, in terms of what I missed out on in that case. But perhaps it would be more easily done if you had tickets to a concert or a show. You could say, well, I wasn't able to attend because I was stuck here at the airport or unable to move around. Yes, so that's really that's one area that I would like us to be thinking about in terms of the potential costs of being separated from your wheelchair. And Gordon, I do see your comment about damage to the wheelchair. I think at the end of the call, if we still have some time, we'll circle back to that, just because we talked a lot about wheelchair damage in part one. And certainly seeing some comments about what type of wheelchair would they provide while waiting for a delayed chair. Yeah, that's certainly something that we should also comment on. What would best accommodate you? That's really what the DOT wants to hear from passengers. And we certainly don't want airlines to be the one driving this conversation. So it's very important to say, what are the parameters of a wheelchair that you would need, or a seat of some kind. I remember one time, when my wheelchair was left behind, I said, well, do you have a cot in the airport here that I can lay on? And I was told no. Margarita has raised her hand.
Yes, hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, hi. I'm an OTA and I just went to a conference in Orlando and I was thinking of this exact thing about not having your chair and not being able to have it for my conference. Also, I do agree with what somebody said about, you know, I- the fines I kind of get, but making it possible for us to get reimbursed for exactly what we lost makes total sense. Including, days we missed for our holidays or conferences we mixed. I know what you said about your conference. I know for my conference you could do by day, right? So you could definitely equate that amount for sure. Um, and also what to expect for us. We need to see something on the airlines website saying things like, or in their accessibility department, what are they going to offer you if you get stuck? Right? Like, not that it's this big thing, but with the DOJ, but something that if we know we're booking with, let's say, Spirit Airlines, we know that if something happens, this will at least have this kind of a wheelchair available to us, and that sort of thing. We all know at most airports, there's a way to find out where you can lay down. I mean, I really feel like they could make that accommodation for us somewhere if that's possible, but I just wanted to add on to what everybody else said and put their money where their mouth is because a lot of people they just don't care.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. And in fact, one thing that the DOT did do recently, maybe about a year now, they put up a dashboard that sort of informs passengers what different airlines will do in the event of a delayed flight or a canceled flight, because all airlines are different. If your flight is canceled on Spirit or Frontier, they're not going to give you a hotel room, whereas if you're flying American or Delta or United, Southwest too, I think they will. And so potentially this could be sort of another way to share that information through the DOT's dashboard. Obviously, we've got to get this rule in place first, and then figure out exactly what that would be. I see a comment here from Kim in the chat that says, if I miss my daughter's graduation, that would be a priceless reimbursement. Yeah, there's really no way, unfortunately, to quantify that. I think probably the airline would say, well, the best we're willing to do is to refund your flight. And that, of course, that doesn't solve for anything. I mean, I heard a couple of years ago about a couple of readers shared with me that the wheelchair was destroyed on the way to a 10-day holiday in Mexico, and they didn't know about it until they got to Mexico. And the gentleman whose wheelchair was damaged spent the entire holiday in bed in the hotel room because his wheelchair had special particular features that enabled him to drive it given his disability, and just nothing was available in that sense. And the same can be true. Obviously, what we're talking about here is our mobility, and nothing an airline provides is going to properly replace a wheelchair that has been designed for us. And so certainly want you to keep these questions in mind. I am going to move on to the sixth proposal. And this one goes into dealing with a damaged wheelchair. And it's the right to choose a repair technician when your wheelchair is damaged. And the DOT is suggesting that passengers should be given two options when their wheelchair is either damaged or destroyed. The first is that the airline chooses the repair technician, which is often what they do today. And then the second is that you choose the repair technician, and the airline is required to pay all of the costs, including the transportation of the device. The billing is suggested to go directly to the airline rather than yourself. That way you don't have to put money out of pocket and wait for reimbursement from the airline. There are a few questions here that I think are going to be very important. I'm certain that not only will airlines be commenting on this, but there are a couple of companies that work for airlines in handling repairs, and I think they will have a lot of comments and perspective on this too, that is not necessarily going to be customer friendly. They are not on your side. That is, the airline is their customer, not you. So I think that's important to remember. The questions, though, the DOT is asking is, are you having disputes with airlines when your wheelchair is damaged over the cost to repair or replace it, or whether a chair is repairable? I know I recently had a chair damaged. Well, I say recently, it's basically a year ago. My feeling was that it should have been totaled and replaced. The airline and their team disagreed. And so here I am almost a year later, and It's just gone out for more repairs today, based on that original incident. Whereas if it had been replaced, I probably would have gotten a new chair within 2 or 3 months. Secondly, should there be a strict timeline for repair? Obviously, I just shared a circumstance where I've been dealing with a repair for a year. And many other passengers have reported extensive waits to get their wheelchairs repaired when they're damaged. And so should the DOT impose a timeline, presumably the airline's failure to meet that deadline would result in the DOT's ability to issue a fine. And then also, should you be given the time to test and verify that a wheelchair has actually been repaired? I know on a couple of occasions, I've gotten my wheelchair back and they said it was fixed, and I'm like, nope, it's not fixed. We need to go back and actually deal with those things. So, okay, I'm seeing a lot of comments here. I agree that we've got to do a better job of protecting wheelchairs. Gonna publish a video in a couple of days to show you something that I recently witnessed that well, as soon as you see the opening frame, you just know it's going to go wrong. So there isn't a whole lot of common sense used, I think, in the handling of wheelchairs, particularly the heavy ones. You may, I think I shared this, you may have seen a video of a baggage handler tossing the wheelchair down the baggage chute that goes from the jet bridge down to the ramp. Actually, a couple of wheelchairs they tossed. That came up in conversation in London. There were everyone had seen that video. I would imagine, though I can't confirm this, that those folks are no longer employed. That was just terrible to see. I do think that sort of intentional disregard is rarer. At least I hope so. You don't see that too often. Wheelchairs get damaged pretty often for sure, but I don't necessarily know that it's always intentional. But there's certainly a lot of negligence that occurs. So are there any thoughts on these questions? When your wheelchair is damaged, how would you like to be able to address it? What should the airline be required to do by the DOT?
So, oh,
Hi, Glenn.
I mean, it seems obvious, but due disputes, yeah, that'll certainly happen, as you just explained. And who's going to resolve that? You could have mediators out there in the world, I suppose, but the reality is, if someone needs a wheelchair, they need it now. They don't need it 6 months from now or 3 months from now. So they, should there be a strict timeline? There certainly should be, like to dispute the repairability versus the replacement. If they can't repair it in a set time frame, and that should be very short in my view, then the replacement needs to happen. And that needs to be put on order and gotten into the system, in my view. And if it is repaired, if you have a car repaired and you can't drive out of the parking lot with it, you're not gonna, that's a problem. So, being able to verify that it's functional for you, it may drive, but if it goes around in circles all the time, that's not very functional. if it's a power wheelchair. So absolutely, it has to be accepted by the user or their representative that it is in fact functional for them as it was before it was damaged.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that final question, the opportunity to verify repairs, should be common sense. I think that's obvious. Hopefully the DOT will say that. I imagine the regulation might say something along the lines of passengers will have X number of days to raise concerns about a repair. I don't like the idea that a time limit might be placed on it. I certainly wouldn't suggest that. But that's that I feel like tends to be how this might play out. Timeline for repair, is there, Glenn, do you have an idea on what what an appropriate time frame might be?
Well, obviously depends on the user and their needs and whether they have another acceptable replacement. If there's an acceptable replacement, then at least, that solves the immediate issue. But I would say, manual wheelchairs, if they can't fix it in a week or some number like that, then that's the problem. The power wheelchairs, getting parts and other things, I mean, it certainly could be for a manual wheelchair too, but maybe that's a little longer, but unfortunately the need is probably greater for the power wheelchair user. So there needs to be an acceptable replacement in place within 24 hours or some number like that, that will mitigate the length of whatever the repair time frame is.
Yeah, certainly agree. Getting a loaner wheelchair in place as soon as possible is very important. I think airlines are probably going to have to do some investment here in having some of these things available to them. I remember earlier this year, or maybe last year, late last year, I was traveling to California. I was in Los Angeles. My wheelchair got damaged. I needed a loaner wheelchair. It was the morning, yeah, I think it was a Saturday morning. And they couldn't find anything. I said, well, I'm going to San Francisco tomorrow. Try to find something there as well. And they couldn't. I don't think it was until Monday that they were able to provide something, and it wasn't sufficient. They told me, they said, well, we have a wheelchair that you can use. The only thing is it doesn't have any securement hooks. So if you're riding a city bus or a taxi, there's nowhere to attach the straps to lock it down. And I'm like, who made this wheelchair? It's a full-size power wheelchair, and there was nowhere to hook into it. So I said, well, that's not going to work. And Los Angeles, San Francisco, two of the largest cities in the country, and the airline couldn't source a loaner wheelchair. That honestly was shocking to me. So I do think there's going to have to be some investment on the part of carriers, to ensure that these are available. I see Marilyn, or Bruce rather. I see your hand is raised.
Hey, can I just interrupt John for 1 second?
Sure.
I can't raise my hand under, is it under participants? There's nothing there.
I think that your screen is different than mine. I can't raise my hand in
It's
my.
it's under React. If you put on React on the heart, there's a raise hand.
React?
On the bottom of my screen, there's a heart and it says react underneath. And there's a raised hand. If you hover over that, you can see it.
Oh, okay. Okay, thank you.
Did you want to say something, Pamela?
I did. I just wanted to say that, this whole issue of loaner chairs, I don't want to see the issue of loaner chairs drag out this whole process of getting this bill passed. Because I think, John, like you say, I think a very small minority of people will be able to use a loaner chair successfully. I know I would never be able to use a loaner chair. I have to have my own chair for many reasons. And a lot of us are in that situation. I couldn't go 2 hours without my wheelchair. And the airlines are going to run into the same problems we all have, which is getting wheelchair industry to work quickly to replace our chairs. So, I mean, I don't think this is not important to some extent, but I really don't want the airlines to think that their way out of this whole problem of damaging wheelchairs is just to concentrate on loaner chairs. Or I want them to stop damaging our chairs in the first place. I mean, that is the only way around this. They have to work on that. That has to be the top priority. They just
Yeah.
have to stop doing this because there's no way around, there's no, they're not going to provide loaner chairs that are really worthwhile. They're just not.
Yeah, I agree. I've never gotten and I've dealt with wheelchair damage more than most people, I would say, maybe more than anyone. And yeah, I've never gotten a loaner wheelchair that was
And you know what? You never will.
sufficient.
You never will, John. You won't ever. And I won't. I need my chair and I don't want them to damage it. That's,
Out of curiosity, Pamela, are you a manual or powered chair user?
I'm a manual.
Okay.
But
Yeah, I mean,
my big problem is when I don't use a catheter, I need to get to the toilet. I can't be fooling around with wheelchairs that don't work for me. I couldn't go 3 hours without my wheelchair. I really couldn't. I need my chair and I don't want them to damage it. And that's where I want them to put all their effort.
I think one thing that we just haven't really considered here, and that I've been planning to include in my comments and saying, for manual wheelchairs especially, there is no reason that they should be damaged, at all. Honestly, I would quadruple the fine on airlines damaging a manual wheelchair. But one thing that I want to suggest to DOT is that they mandate an increased size for the onboard closet to accommodate a wider range of the fixed wheelchairs that are now in use. Because, when the regulation was written, the majority of people using wheelchairs were using those hospital type wheelchairs.
You know how the manual chairs get damaged? They get smushed. They get smushed by other heavy objects. It can happen in
certainly
cargo.
much more fragile. I think the only place a power wheelchair is safe in the cargo hold, and this isn't necessarily a guarantee, but on a wide body airplane, and then outside of the United States on Airbus 320 series aircraft, wheelchairs get loaded into a cargo container. They should be the only thing in that cargo container. They're protected on all sides. They're basically in a metal box.
Right.
Now, I did have a flight on a wide body. I was headed down to Argentina 3-4 years ago, and they put it in the container, but they didn't strap it down. So yeah, my frame got bent. That chair ended up getting totaled. And I was like, how did this happen? And they said, yeah, it wasn't secured in the container. We're sorry.
You know, one thing they could
Um,
do, and then I'll stop talking because I've been talking a lot, but I think they should take the time to have somebody who handles wheelchairs, you know, secure the chair, do whatever they need to do, put it in a container, put it wrap, you know, whatever they're going to do. Take a picture of where it is and how it's being stored and show it to the passenger so that the passenger can look at it and say, yes, I feel good about that. Now they're going to say, oh, no, we don't have the time to do that. Well, how many people in wheelchairs they have on a plane? They do have the time.
Yeah, and you know, I think all this can be done through the mobile applications for the airlines. Just about everyone has a
Yeah.
smartphone these days. It doesn't take long at all to send a photo. So I certainly encourage you to share that in public comments. I think that's a great idea.
Yeah.
I do want to get to some of the other questions. Bruce, your hand was raised, and then we'll go to Glenn.
Hi, it's Marilyn. I'm going to speak this time. I've had
Okay.
the highs and the lows of this. Out of fear of taking my power chair, I'm a recent user. I went in my manual chair on a trip. On a nonstop flight, it was damaged. But on a Saturday late afternoon evening, they found someone who would take it, took it to a shop, fixed it, brought it back to me at my hotel, all on a Saturday evening, manual chair. Currently,
Wow.
so I took a power chair on a trip and it was damaged. I knew that at the midway point. The tech they sent out to look at it at my home took one look and he said, frame is bent, this chair has got to be replaced. Well, that got sent to the repair people who said they couldn't really tell. Could we get more pictures? It's now been 2 months, just about, and they have agreed there's a need for a new chair, but not one thing has happened to make that order be in process. It's been spec'd out, but who knows when someone will act to get the order done. Best and the worst.
Can I ask which airline this most recent one was?
I guess the recent one was American and through Dallas Fort Worth.
Yep, I'm not surprised. I'm, you know, it's not my fault this happened to you, but I am so sorry. I get emails all the time from people who have had wheelchairs damaged or been injured. It's every day I hear about another story. You know, the numbers in the DOT monthly report, those are very real people.
Yeah.
And no, I'm not surprised to hear about your experience with the replacement, because you know everyone knows, and I'm not afraid that to just say my experiences with American are terrible. I should probably write something about this, but I'll tell you guys since you're here. The reason that I fly American is pretty simple, in that my family lives at and I had lived for quite a long time in a city that was only served by two airlines, and American was one of them. And I had tried the other airline and had really poor experiences, and went to American looking for greener pastures. Um, and so that's why I fly this airline that treats me and others so poorly. But you know, the reality is, um, I hear the same stories from other airlines too.
But
So this is,
it's
sorry, go ahead.
It's person dependent. On the first leg of my outbound, the ramp manager told me, she came into the cabin, she said, I see your chair, I see you've got directions on it. I'm gonna go make sure it's put where it belongs and secured how it needs to be. She came back to the cabin. She said, I made the ramp crew read the directions, say them back to me so that they knew what to do with your chair. It's all secured. You're good for this leg.
Conversation. And I'd like, this is Bruce, Marilyn's significant other, husband.
Hi, Bruce.
The reason they get away with this, the airlines in general, is because there's no right of private action. If you could
Yep.
sue the airline, this wouldn't happen. The airlines for America, not, you notice, is not for the passenger. The airlines, which means airlines for the airlines, have got the Congress wrapped around his ear, around his thumb, and they take away your right to sue them for this.
Okay, and I'm going to interject here and then we'll stop, I promise. With all transparency, my husband knows a lot about this. He is an aviation specialty attorney.
Okay. Well, Bruce, we should chat sometime. You're saying a lot of the things that I think about often. Agree that I think a lot of people, IATA is a great example. They're setting the standards for wheelchair care and passenger treatment, and they are basically a union for airlines, and that's the same as what Airlines for America is. And so much of policy is set based on the recommendations of airlines and not the recommendations of and based upon the concerns of consumers. I think this whole rulemaking as it stands, I think doesn't go far enough. So that's what's going to come out in my comments. But yeah, I totally agree. We are up against a cabal here, and private right of action would be huge. There are very limited circumstances where people have been able to seek redress in the courts. If you somehow become injured, that opens up a big door. Not that you want to get injured. I mean, that's not a good thing, but and of course, injury extends beyond the physical environment, as we've talked about earlier. People missing out on vacations because they're stuck in a hotel room bed for 10 days is just unacceptable. But I appreciate your comments. Glenn?
Yeah, I mean, as you well know, John, my frustration is that all of these are Band-Aids until we can roll on and roll off in our own chairs at our own discretion onto the planes. I think all of this is noise just to divert the attention of what really should be happening. And I think that that's where the focus of everybody's attention should be, because I think, that at least gives the passenger a choice on these things. And if they're sitting in the chair and it gets damaged, or you got a lot more problems than you want to be talking about.
Yeah, absolutely agree. Everything that we've seen from the DOT in the last couple of years has been oriented toward this maintaining the status quo of wheelchairs in the cargo hold. I think that regulation is so often far behind. We've got this new rule for larger lavatories on airplanes. They're not accessible, and they won't be accessible from the wheelchair for when the wheelchair comes into the cabin. But something that I also thought was funny is this week American Airlines announced the new interior of their soon-to-be Airbus 321 extra long range, XLR. The airplane hasn't been delivered yet. It's going to be delivered without these new larger accessible lavatories that have just been regulated, because they'll be the airplanes will be delivered before the effective date of the rule. So for the next 30 years, these airplanes will be flying in the skies, and completely inaccessible bathrooms. This single aisle aircraft type will be flying to Europe and to South America. And so that's where we're at. DOT, I think, has been dropping the ball for decades, but particularly now when there does seem to be a light at the end of the tunnel, starting to become visible for a wheelchair space on the airplane, but the regulation we're seeing just is not preparing for that at all. Kim?
Okay, sorry.
No worries.
Well, you know, you talk about them having a fine if they lose your wheelchair per day, but then you said the DOT doesn't always make people pay, but it shouldn't be up to the DOT. It should be a fine that they have to pay the passenger per day, plus repair their chair, plus any other expenses they incur. And that way it would be a big enough price tag that they might actually take care of your chair.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. The greater the financial penalty, the greater the incentive to not incur that penalty. Yeah, I mean, I don't disagree with that at all.
But it should be up to us. And so that it'd be, you know, the DOT should just say, whatever they say happened, you know, whatever damages they have to have, you will pay it without reneg, you know, immediately. And that if they would do something like that, then maybe they would start paying attention because they know it would happen.
I know something that is really refreshing. You know, when I'm flying in Europe, if my flight is delayed more than X number of hours, I'm entitled to cash payment from the airline. If I believe it's 4 or 6 hours, I think it's 4 hours on a long haul flight. If I'm delayed more than 4 hours on a long haul flight, I'm entitled to 600 euros. And last year, I think I wrote about this on the blog. An airline had to pay this out to me. I think it was either Swiss or Lufthansa. They're the same company owned by they're the same ownership group. But you know, if I'm on a flight here in the US and it's delayed 2 days, you know, I've just got to be thankful if the airline says here's $100 voucher for future travel. And so I definitely think there's been interest from the DOT in following on with some sort of compensation structure like that. I completely agree that there should be some, you know, awards made available to wheelchair users whose wheelchairs are left behind, damaged. I mean, you know, I think one of the things that we don't consider, and you know, it sounds like Marilyn is going through this right now. She's been dealing with a damaged wheelchair for 2 months. How much of, you know, your time gets dedicated to dealing with something that you should never have had to encounter in the first place? And there's certainly no compensation for that. You know, today I had I had one wheelchair returned by a repair technician and another one taken away for repair. So I had to meet up with him, and maybe I'll get the other chair back tomorrow. I think probably not, because he hadn't properly assessed the chair last time. So yeah, you know, I don't know how much longer I'm going to be dealing with that particular wheelchair, but you know, it's just infuriating how much of my time just gets wasted. You know, from reporting the damage at the airport to calling the third party that deals with this for the airline, to then dealing with the repair technician himself. It's just it drives me crazy. Kim, your hand is up again. Is that right?
Yeah, I was just curious, that 600 euros you got, was that for everybody whose flight was delayed or just yours because you're handicapped?
No, that's for everyone. So there are very strict consumer rights in transportation. The idea in the European Union, and this is also upheld now by the United Kingdom even after their exit from EU, is that by purchasing an airline ticket or a train ticket, you engage in a contract, and the airline should honor what they've sold to you. And if they're delayed and it's their fault, which more often than not it is, except when really some of the only examples are if an airport gets shut down, bad weather, or as often happens in Europe, an air traffic controller strike. Those are things outside of the airline's control, but most delays are not a result of those things. And so people are collecting this compensation fairly frequently. And airlines have had to account for that in their business model, that we have to deliver flights on time and as we promised and sold them, because people are making plans and counting on us to do so. And if we fail, then we've got to compensate. Of course, that does establish sort of an upper limit to the compensation. I think in the question that we were asked earlier by the DOT, what are some of the costs that you should have to be reimbursed for? That seems kind of open-ended, and I would like it to remain so that, heck, if you've traveled across the country and you bought one of those Taylor Swift tickets and you missed the, event because your wheelchair was delayed or damaged, the airline should, pay you back for that $2,000 ticket. I can't believe people were spending that, but, to each their own. Okay, I am going to move on to point 7. I think we've kind of already discussed this, but there are a couple other questions here. Basically that, if your wheelchair is damaged or delayed, you'll have a right to receive a loaner wheelchair. What really came through in this that we haven't seen before, and I'll just read this verbatim. It says airlines would be required to provide upon request functional and safety related customizations, such as changing cushions, adding lumbar support, seat attachments, adjusting the headrest, armrest, or footrest on loaner wheelchairs to the extent possible to ensure passengers can safely use them. I think when I've had loaner wheelchairs, another common adjustment that has already been made on my behalf is the fact that, well, my right hand is amputated, I'm left-handed. Most wheelchairs are created for right-handed people. And so anytime I'm getting a loaner wheelchair, I have to have the control joystick moved to the left side. That has happened in nearly all cases. I say nearly because there have been a few times where, it just wasn't done or wasn't possible. But, DOT is asking what types of customization should be required. And then, I think that this is maybe even, more detailed of a question than the one we just had earlier addressed. And that's if an individual with a disability incurs additional associated costs because the loaner wheelchair that you're provided restricts your mobility or independence, should the airline be responsible for reimbursing the individual for those costs? What are these potential costs? And I think that, associated costs because your mobility is restricted or your independence is restricted. What does that mean? I think of some stories I've heard. College student, wheelchair user, goes off on spring break holiday, comes back, wheelchair is damaged and can't go to class. Well, does that mean reimbursing tuition? I think that there's a lot of possibilities around liability here. I know airlines are going to be very concerned about this. They will try to, nix this from the regulation. So I think it's very important to be thoughtful in communicating to DOT exactly how this can happen and how it should be carried out. Pamela.
Yeah, this is another question where I don't think there's an appropriate answer. I mean, if they give me a loaner chair and I get a bed sore from it, right?
Yeah.
And I have to go to the hospital and I can't go to work and everything else that happens with a pressure sore. And by the
So-
way, this is going to happen quite often if you're
Absolutely.
sitting in a loaner chair. I don't think the airline should get involved with any of this. I think they should just protect our wheelchairs. These are all dummy questions. You can't answer them. And, they should stop talking about this, frankly. I think they just have to concentrate on keeping our chairs safe at all times. These are trick questions. And we're never going to be able to answer them in a way that's going to satisfy us and it's going to get a bill passed. There's just no way. So I don't even think it's worth talking about this, frankly. I really think we should concentrate on what are ways to keep the wheelchairs safe.
No, I agree. I think point 8 is when it's the training question. And that I think is really where there is an opportunity to make a big difference. I hear you. I think my understanding, I'm working on writing something on this right now with some assistance from legal experts. But my feeling is that if you get a pressure sore and end up in the hospital as a result of the airline damaging your wheelchair, you should probably be going to federal court.
But you're
That's
going to
my
lose the case
feeling.
because you'll never be able to prove it. It's a waste of time, I think.
Well, I have been, I've been tracking cases like this for a while, and there has been a lot of success. Usually they end up in settlement. But last year I covered the story of NJ Foster, who was injured being deplaned from an airplane. And that really tragic story, absolutely terrible. But because of his injury, that opened the door to litigation where it might not otherwise have existed, because there was such negligence involved. And I think that there are a lot of videos out there that I've taken of wheelchairs being damaged, oftentimes my own, that just suggest absolute negligence. And I think that, once that sort of standard is met, then the courtroom becomes a place where we can enter that we might not otherwise have access to. And I see your oh, sorry, that's waiting room. But yeah, no, I mean, I agree that we've got to prioritize the proper handling of wheelchairs. But at the end of the day, I think the DOT is concerned about these questions in point 7 because they know just as things stand, wheelchairs are getting damaged every day, a lot of them, and people are having to deal with this. And at the very least, I know many people the loaner wheelchair just isn't going to work for them, but maybe at the very least it can get them home and to their bed. And that's terrible and disappointing, but yeah, nonetheless. Glenn.
I'm just thinking, litigation is not anything that, anybody really wants to go through. Perhaps there should be a straight per diem at a large number in the time frame before the chair gets returned to them in a satisfactory condition. Be that $1,000 or $2,500 a day, some significant amount, so that they know that the clock's ticking and there's at least this amount of costs. Will it cover everything for everybody? No. But if there's litigation, it's going to go over and above that anyway. Maybe just having a, like I say, a per diem cost associated with lack of chair in a serviceable condition. And the clock automatically starts, period.
Yeah. Kim?
That's kind of the point I was trying to make when I spoke earlier, is what just Glenn said, except I didn't use the word per diem, but that's a good word, is that per diem is paid, like you said, no matter what. If we make the price high enough, they will start paying more attention. And even though Pam says, they just need to take care of the chairs, they're right. But to enable that to do, we have to make the penalties so that they want to take care of your chair.
Yeah, I think something that has really, come through here in this conversation, I'm sure a lot of us have been thinking about for a long time, is just the fact that, carriers are not, taking extra care and doing things the right way, even though it's the right thing to do, that there needs to be some other incentive. And unfortunately, maybe a big stick in this case is the incentive. They've got to be penalized. And certainly agree that it's preferable that those penalties be directed toward passengers rather than the Department of the Treasury. Okay, I'm going to move on to question 8. And this will be the last one. And it is the DOT is proposing that training be provided on an annual basis to airline employees and contractors who physically assist passengers with mobility disabilities or who handle passengers' wheelchairs. And it says that the training must simulate actual duties with a human volunteer or a full body mannequin. And so basically the change here is that there had been requirement, well, 2 things. First, and it's not written here in the proposal, but the training will be required before any of these people can go to work. Whereas there had sort of been a period of time in which people could start the job without training, which that's crazy to be lifting people without training. But now they'll all have to be trained before they start work. And then secondly, they'll have to have that recurrent training every year. And it must be sort of this full training process rather than, a very inadequate, quick e-course kind of thing. And secondly, that recurrent training, I think, had previously been 18 months, so this will move up to every 12 months. And so DOT is asking, are these adequate changes? And secondly, should training requirements be specific rather than a list of topics? And then if so, what topics should be included in that training? And then should training be more frequent than annually? And should more employees be trained? And so basically this training will be directed towards the folks who help you on and off the airplane, and then the folks who handle your wheelchair. So the ramp crew who lift it on and off the airplane. And so, yeah, I'd love to hear some conversation about this in terms of, I think the DOT here is asking a lot of questions, and it means they probably haven't thought a whole lot about how to regulate this. And, quite frankly, about all these topics. These are sort of, high level recommendations, but with very little specificity. And they're asking us to fill in the blanks for them. And so that's why the public comment, I think, is going to be very important, but particularly on this issue, where basically they're saying, yeah, we know people need to be trained. What should they be trained on? So I'd love to hear that from you, and Kim, love to hear from you.
Well, I just had a question. So when you talk about them transferring you or, into the airplane, is that an employee of the airport or an employee of the airline? Because I haven't traveled for a few years, and I was thinking it was somebody that was an employee of the airport that brought that ramp chair, that aisle chair down and asked
Sure.
more.
And yeah, and I understand the confusion here. I've written about this before, but I've been meaning to go deeper into it again. Those folks, more often than not in the United States, they're employees of a third-party company that the airline contracts with. The airport has no responsibility in the US of helping you on and off the airplane. All of the, from check-in to baggage claim, all of the assistance that folks receive is the responsibility of the airline. They have for a very long time tried to scapegoat these incidents. They'll say, oh, your wheelchair was damaged, that was our contractor. Oh, you were dropped, that was our contractor. Well, at the end of the day, the buck stops with the airline because they're the ones required to provide the service and assistance. So, in the United States, it's the airline that's responsible. I have long thought the other day, when I arrived back to the United States, they were taking a long time to return my wheelchair. I was being pressured to get off the airplane. And I told the assistance guy who was there with the aisle chair, I said, I would like to speak to a CRO. That's a complaint resolution official. And he looked at me like he'd never heard that term before. He had no idea what I was asking for. And I thought, these folks are clearly not getting enough training. If you don't know what a CRO is and you're a representative of the airline, even though you're not a direct employee of the airline, that's just wild. So the training is absolutely insufficient. And I think it's going to be very important for us to be able to lay out for the DOT what we think should be included in this training. Glenn, yeah, love to hear from you.
One last round of comments, and then I'm going to excuse myself.
Sure.
A while back, I looked online for the job postings for these personnel, and I looked in lots of major cities, and it basically, the job descriptions and the wages were minimum wage, and the job description did not satisfy the requirements of the position. And until we get to a point where you can't outsource these things so that the airline is not, you said at the end of the day, the airline's responsible. I think at the beginning of the day, the only part that we should be able to outsource is maybe somebody needing pushing assistance from point A to point B on the ground before they get near the airplane. As soon as they start having to deal with anything related to a passenger, I think that has to be legislated to be part of the airline direct employee responsibility, because the turnover on these positions is weekly, and it just isn't going to happen under the current business model for the service providers. That's all.
Yeah. Yeah. I've certainly thought before about, where could we shift responsibility, or bring these in-house. And I remember after US Airways and American Airlines merged, Philadelphia was an airport where both airlines had a strong presence. And I remember, and I may be mixing these up, but in Terminal B, wheelchair assistance on and off the airplane and, to the next gate and wherever, was provided by the staff of one of the airlines. I think it was US Airways. There's a sort of after a merger at an airline, there's a, people identify one another as pre-merger, and whichever airline they came from. So I think it was the pre-merger US Airways people. They were under a different contract. And so they were actually direct employees of the new American Airlines after the merger, and had been direct employees of US Airways who had not outsourced wheelchair assistance. And so I always, at least in the early days of the merger, I was very happy to arrive at Philadelphia Terminal B, because I said the quality of the assistance here is so much better than I would get at any other terminal. And the reason for that is because the folks were direct employees of the airline, had a benefits package from the airline, had travel perks and incentives, and were longer term employees who were not subject to the high rates of turnover that Glenn was mentioning. They were not minimum wage employees who were sustained basically entirely by tips, which is sort of the expectation of a lot of wheelchair assistance folks. And I've really grappled with perspective on this. One of my very good friends in the summers, now when we were in college, I wasn't a wheelchair user at the time. And so maybe I didn't quite appreciate it at the time, but he in the summers would go and work at the airport and, provide assistance services. I've talked to him a lot about it since then. And he's one of the good guys. But, a lot of their income obviously came from tips. You would think that that would encourage a higher level of service, but I don't necessarily know that it does. And I think part of the problem here is that folks just are not trained to an adequate standard to provide the level of assistance that people need. Got an email yesterday from a reader, honestly broke my heart. She was just manhandled by employees of the airline, or rather employees of the contractor who works for the airline, and was injured. They wouldn't listen to her. They were rushing. At no point did it seem as though, based on her description, that the staff were at all concerned about her safety or comfort or dignity. That is, it infuriates me. But I do think that, DOT is saying, we need to know what to include in this training. And so I'd love to hear from folks here, what do you think is sufficient training? And thanks so much, Glenn, for joining. Always look forward to your contributions. Um, you know, Gretchen here has a good comment, and this is something I was actually thinking about very recently. Um, I spent a lot of time in the hotel, and not the hotel. Well, I do spend a lot of time in hotels, but in the hospital back in the day. And I remember when I would go into surgery, or have get moved to a new hospital bed or whatever. The folks who were doing that for me, I think they called them CNAs, certified nursing assistants. These are folks who had undergone some professional training, had received some level of education in the proper care of individuals, in the hospital environment, many of whom have disabilities, either permanent or temporary. I could have trust in them lifting me or moving me about or doing, whatever services they were providing, because I had trust in whatever certification that they had received from the state. And the folks who are lifting us in and out of seats and wheelchairs and aisle chairs, they don't have any kind of certification. And many of them are going through literally an hour or 2 hour e-course where they click through, on the computer screen, and are not having actual any hands-on experience. And so I think that two things need to happen. Obviously, the training needs to be expanded, but secondarily, I really think that unless these people are going to be certified to some accepted standard from a legitimate authority or government entity, we need to have transparency in what this training entails. And so, I've invited airlines to open up their training to me. Let me see the training you're provided. None of them are inviting me to see that. And so I think that, that's something that we need to say. Maybe this should not be sort of an ad hoc process by which airlines create their own training. Maybe the government needs to step in and work with a university or disability experts, probably not the disability experts that are managing training for airlines right now. And there are some of them. I think maybe we need to go in a new direction to get something of higher quality. But I think that there needs to be more confidence in the level of training that is being provided. Should we apply for the job and go through the training ourselves? Yes, I would love to see it. Now, look, I will say, I've heard from plenty of people. I actually am friends with quite a few people who provide this wheelchair assistance in the airport. I, of course, know people who, have worked in the roles previously, have moved on to other things. I strike up a conversation. It's amazing what people will share in exchange for a $20 bill. I've been able to learn about basically the insufficiency of the training as it exists today. Folks have, just said to me, I don't really feel confident in doing this. I came in on a flight recently, and the guy said, "Do you need help? What do you need?" And I was like, "Oh no, I can transfer on my own into the aisle chair." He's like, "Oh, thank God. I've never done this before." And I'm like, that is crazy. Like, that is wild. I don't know, Kim. I think that's I've never, I don't, as a general rule, I don't pay sources, but that, provided, the $20 was for, helping me on and off the aircraft. And that just opens up, the conversation. I can ask some follow-up questions. Okay, let's see. Need a certification course. I agree. One thing Gordon brings up here is very important. Employees need sensitivity training. Absolutely. I think some of that sensitivity, maybe they just need a base level sensitivity and understanding that these people that we're helping on and off airplanes are actually human beings and not bags. That is very frustrating. Any comments, further comments on this topic? Seeing Susan has commented here in the chat, training in other countries is significantly better. I agree. There's a higher standard of assistance and care generally in Europe compared to the United States. That's not always the case. People still get injured. I know the people there get paid better than here. They've got better benefits. I think something that Glenn was sharing earlier about sort of forcing assistance staff to be employees of the airlines rather than outsourced contractors could be very valuable. There's something I think that incentivizes people when they're an employee of Delta Airlines rather than Prospect or Bags or ABM. Some of the contractors that are out there, certainly an option. I just encourage, as you're putting your comments together, and we've still got I guess about 3 weeks. The deadline as it stands is the 13th of May. I have heard that the airline industry is asking for the deadline to be extended. No doubt to craft better arguments and lobby. But as of now, the deadline is the 13th of May. It's very important to share your comments with the DOT in written form. I will publish what I'm going to submit, but please do not copy and paste it. Your perspective is important. And also DOT, if you just copy and paste what I wrote, well, that'll just count as one thing. They're not gonna separately read sort of carbon copy statements. So it's very valuable to share your own personal experience. Very important to focus your answers on the questions that they've asked. You can certainly extend beyond that. But by asking these questions, they've suggested that this is where they're focusing, this rulemaking. And so it would just be a tragedy to, submit comments about, oh, yes, the training is inadequate and not say what should be included in the training. So that's very important.